All right, so we're live here. Welcome to the Plant Stock channel. This is Jesse, and here today we have a guest that's been here before, which is Mayur. And I think most people are familiar with you, but maybe it's good if you just introduce yourself for those who haven't met you before.
Yeah, sure. So I'm a everyday guy, no one special, just someone that's trying to make sense of the markets. I love disruptive, growth stories,
Mm.
but especially companies that are making a difference, in the world and tackling big problems that we're facing. And so, that's a part of my overall investment strategy. I'm a lifelong student of investing, and I actually started because of studying the greats, the legendary investors of our generation. Warren Buffett, Charlie Munger, Peter Lynch, Bill Miller, and just use their wisdom to guide how I think about companies and buying their shares. That's
Right.
kind of what I do.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. So welcome. So we're gonna talk about Beyond Meat today, and we're gonna maybe first talk about the KFC deal and what was going on yesterday when it dropped like crazy. If we just take a look at the stock chart here in Seeking Alpha, we can see it's up around 11%, and market has been open about 90 minutes. So that's a huge difference from yesterday, where it actually yesterday it dropped about I would say 15%. It went up 10% first pre-market and then dropped. So yeah, that is what do you think is going on here?
Yeah, so this is a combination of a couple things here because obviously this is great news for Beyond Meat as if just fundamentally speaking.
Yeah,
It does look like the market has stabilized a little bit here, so that's also helping
yeah,
with the stock. But the big thing here is a combination of two things. Great news that Beyond Meat is signing up with KFC, or KFC is signing up with Beyond Meat to go nationwide at all KFC restaurants across the United States
right.
to supply the new plant-based chicken supplied by Beyond Meat. So that's huge news,
Yeah,
for Beyond Meat and for visibility, for brand building, but also because right now Beyond Meat is, according to my data, is the fourth most heavily shorted stock
yeah,
out of all U.S. common stocks. If you just look at the U.S. market, common stocks that trade on the U.S. exchanges, U.S. domiciled companies, not including foreign companies, Beyond Meat is the number four most heavily shorted stock in terms of total shares held short as a percentage of total shares outstanding. And it's even higher if you use the float, right, which is the shares that's not held by insiders. Because remember, Ethan Brown doesn't own a sizable chunk of the shares, of the total amount of shares that's outstanding for Beyond Meat.
yeah,
So if you use it as a percentage of the float basis, it's even higher.
right. So yeah, right
And
now,
that is very dangerous for if you're short the stock right now.
right. Yeah, because I'm not sure how up to date Seeking Alpha or Yahoo Finance is, but it says that it's close to 40%. It's like 37% right now. Uh,
Yeah,
so that is pretty high,
that's
considering.
huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of like similar to how much was when it was at its top shorting position when it comes to Tesla. How high was it at maximum?
I think the highest it got was around, oh man, I think it was like around 25%.
All
I want to
right.
say maybe 20 to 25%.
Yeah.
So this is higher than that.
Right.
So the total number of shares outstanding for Beyond Meat is 63 million, roughly.
Yeah.
But the float is down to about 58 million, last I checked. So, and right now, according to Nasdaq, as of December 15th, total shares held short is 20.8 million.
Wow.
20.8 million out of the 63 million shares outstanding total,
Man.
and 57 million float shares. Right, so that's a huge chunk.
Yeah.
That's on the float basis, that's beyond 33%.
Yeah.
So that is very, very high.
Yeah. Actually, one of my one of my subscribers had a question about that. I think it was Alvin. He asked that in regards to the short community around Beyond, can they really hurt the business by continuing with the downward pressure? What do you think about that?
What was that? The downward pressure on what?
On when they're shorting basically Beyond as much as they do, can it basically hurt the overall business?
Um, yes and no. For a company like Beyond Meat, since they are still reliant on the equity markets for funding, for external funding, it does have, in the short term, a negative influence on the company itself.
Yeah,
Because if they needed access to capital markets, I don't think they do right now, this instant. But if they did, and if this persisted for long enough, then they would be forced to raise equity at much less favorable, terms.
yeah,
Um, and remember, if the stock goes down, that also exerts pressure on bonds too, because bonds also track the stock market, especially for a company like Beyond Meat, who is not yet profitable consistently. Their bonds are rated junk status because it is a high risk company for bondholders.
right.
And so, the rates or the yield on the bonds are also very, very high right
Yeah,
now.
all right.
And that tracks the stock price as well.
But like you said, considering, I think it was like almost a year ago now, or was in April or May when they took out a huge debt, about $1 billion. I think they have
Yes.
about $800 million left. So it seems like they're probably good to go for a couple of years.
Yeah, I think so. I think so. And we'll see what the Q4 number tells us in terms of cash burn. I think it won't be as bad as what we saw in Q3.
Yeah,
Q3 was really kind of a bad quarter overall. It just seemed like a lot of negative things happened all at once in one quarter, and not enough, good news came in, to offset that. So
right.
Q3, what I think was a one-off that really set off this sell-off.
Yeah,
But we'll see what happens with Q4 numbers. But I think, Q1 numbers are truly going to be interesting,
yeah,
because the first quarter of 2022 is going to be the first full quarter where we have, Beyond Meat at all UK restaurants
right.
at McDonald's, and when we have basically the entire quarter of KFC.
Yeah.
And so KFC starts this upcoming Monday. I believe McDonald's in the UK already started as of yesterday, I believe.
Yeah, the 5th, exactly, yesterday. So like
Yes.
1,300 locations.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
So Q1 of 2022 is going to be the first quarter where we start to really find out, not just revenue, but margins. So that's
yeah.
another big question that we want to find out about it is, this is all great news
Mm,
that, Beyond Meat is striking these big time deals with
mm,
huge restaurant chains.
yeah,
But the next question investors are going to ask is at what, gross margin
yeah.
are they doing this at?
Yeah, you were talking about that. If you guys aren't aware, on my free Discord channel, we get to meet Mayur once in a while, talking about Beyond Meat and Oatly, and you talked about that when it comes to the Mac plant. That could it be reasonable that we've seen prices from was it Peter Saleh from BITG, the analyst firm there, that said that if we would see Beyond Meat at 13,000 locations in the US, nationwide McDonald's there. We could expect about 200 million extra in revenue. And if we have about 1,300 locations in the UK, well, does it make sense that we could expect another 20 million in revenue since it's 10% of that? And you said something about of those 20 million, maybe 25% would have to go to McDonald's, if I understood it correctly.
Yeah, and I'm just guessing, just because if you look at McDonald's gross margins, they're actually quite high,
Mm,
for a restaurant, right?
yeah,
It's at I believe about 50%. So I don't know if they necessarily will require a 50% gross margin on the McPlant burger,
yeah,
but I don't think that they're going to want to dilute their margins too much
yeah.
on this new product.
Right.
So, I think they'll go, with something less than that, what they're doing currently. But how much they're willing to go lower is a big question. So we have no idea what that number might be.
Yeah. But
And Ethan Brown has been kind of tight-lipped on that too, because he doesn't, since they don't want to. It's a matter that McDonald's is in charge of. So I'm sure, according to the deal terms, they can't talk about margins and the revenue split between the two.
no.
But we're going to find out. As soon as Beyond Meat reports Q1 results sometime in late April or early May,
Mm,
then we'll find out exactly what the impact is going to be to
yeah.
Beyond Meat.
Exactly. And considering that, like you said, he has been pretty tight-lipped, and people seem to keep misunderstanding the deals that Beyond Meat has had with all these great, larger companies. Because what was it, back in November in 2020, when McDonald's CEO went out and talked about that they're going to do the Mac plant, but they weren't really mentioning Beyond Meat. Everyone panicked and run for the hill, right? And then still, some of us said that it still makes sense that you should be making it with, the forerunner in this sector, and the company that actually puts this kind of R&D into their products. It just made sense. And then in January, we found out that they're going to make the deal. And then people have been panicking for almost a year, because they're like, well, we don't see any deal. We don't see them starting to sell, just at a few locations here and there. But Ethan actually said, I think it was in the either it was in the I think it was in the Q4, which was, well, in February, I think, that these deals, they take about 8 to 9 months, if not a year, before they actually get started. And then we've seen it now getting started. It's the same thing with the PepsiCo deal, right? Because we've known that now for about 1 year as well. When we found that out, the stock flew up like 40% in a few minutes. When the market opened, went down to 20% again, but still. So really anticipated, but no one have been wondering. A lot of people have been wondering, so is this going to happen? But it seems like if you actually look for the clues, and we have a lot of people in my Discord who been looking into LinkedIn, and there's a lot of clues there. They're taking in a lot of different researchers who are working on, who are experts and have PhDs when it comes to how dairy works and molecular structure. And so it kind of gives us an idea there on the PepsiCo deal, right?
Yeah, exactly. And and I want to share, if I can share my screen here.
Yeah.
So a big question that people ask is, why would McDonald's want to do this,
Mm,
right? They're extremely profitable right now,
yeah.
and Beyond Meat is an upstart. They need McDonald's more than McDonald's needs them. And that's a fair point, but here's the reason I think that McDonald's is working on deals like this.
Yeah.
And if you can see my screen here, I
Yeah.
have, pulled up a chart of McDonald's revenue over the past 30 years versus their total liabilities. You can just see that, relative to each other.
Yeah.
They've taken on a lot of debt in recent years. Now, I don't think this necessarily means that they're in trouble, but it's just something to keep an eye on, right?
Yeah.
They've entered a lot of additional leverage. And at the same time, revenues have actually been on the downturn for the last 7 years now. So you can see very consistent growth all throughout the 90s and even the 2000s. And then they finally peaked right around 2014. And revenues have actually been on the downtrend from, since that point onwards.
Yeah.
Now you can see a little bit of an uptick here. I'm guessing that has to do with, COVID and their ability to deliver through, I believe, through Uber Eats. And so that's kind of helped them a lot in terms of, getting a little bit of that revenue growth back.
Yeah.
But still, these are very, very terrible comps over, say, 5 years or, even 10 years. So, there's a little bit of McDonald's fatigue, I think, around the world here. And this doesn't necessarily mean that they've been closing down stores. I don't think that's a big part of it. So what this means is, same store sales have been going down, for
Yeah.
the last 7 years straight. And I don't think this means that they're in trouble necessarily, because if you look at earnings are up very, strongly. So they've been persistent in terms of controlling costs and getting more and more efficient at cost controls, which is, great, but that can only last for so long, right? A company can only have increasing profits for so long. Ultimately, profits will catch up to revenue growth.
Right.
Um, and that can last for maybe a year, maybe 2 years or 3 years, but you can't go an entire decade of contracting revenue and increasing earnings. At some point, those cost savings are exhausted.
Right.
So I think McDonald's needs something to juice that top line once again. And I think that's why they're making this bet that plant-based meat is the way to do that,
Right.
right? And I know countless people that, have just never gone to McDonald's ever since they were kids, right? It used to be fun going there as a kid, but they haven't gone there their entire adult lives. So McDonald's is making this bet that, plant-based meat is the way to get that some of that mojo back.
Yeah, because that's what I've been thinking. Like for over a year, people have been stating that yeah, Beyond Meat should be so thankful. And but again, I think this does make sense. Like you're basically talking about that it's a good move for McDonald's too. And considering that Burger King, which is a small chain, but they're still pretty big. They have about what 8,000 restaurants, I think, in the U.S. And they basically have a deal with Impossible. So it wouldn't make sense for McDonald's to go to Impossible to begin with. And I'm guessing this actually tells us something, right? That when people always say that legacy companies could be the threat to Beyond Meat, yet McDonald's aren't talking to the legacy companies, or Burger King isn't talking to the legacy companies. They're talking about with the pure plays, right? The experts.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly, exactly. And I think McDonald's ultimately basically looked at this chart right here,
Yep.
and this is a chart of Beyond Meat's revenue, and they
Wow.
see this trend happening, and they're like, "Why can't we get a chart that looks like this for our company?"
Yeah.
So this is a big time CAGR of 37% between 2019 and 2023. These are obviously estimates from analysts that I'm bringing in. Um, but this is basically, people say that, how is this possible? How can they possibly do this? It's a fad, or, it's a, processed, highly processed, food. And, it's really not. And I think, the truth is going to come out as soon as we get those results back from Stanford University, that clinical trial that they're working on.
Yes,
That's
it's
going to
the
be the
second one,
first.
isn't it?
What's that?
Is it? It's a second one, or is it still continuing? Because it's been there's come out data from there like 1 or 1.5 year ago, which kind of
Yeah.
showed it's better. It's way better than typical meat products.
Yeah, so that was definitely there. So they did find that it did reduce heart disease risk factors like TMAO,
Hmm.
right? So they saw a very clear divergence between the test group, which ate Beyond Meat, and the other group that ate red meat. And they noticed that the plant-based group did have a noticeable reduction, a statistically significant reduction in the heart disease risk factor known as TMAO.
Yeah.
So that's a very, very encouraging sign. But clinicians will say, well, that's a very small study. You need to have a much broader, a much longer term study to make it relevant. And so that's what they're doing now. So they're doing a 5-year comprehensive study, a much larger study, with a lot additional, different demographics involved this time. So I think this will give us the first ever comprehensive clinical study on the effect of Beyond Meat,
Yeah.
and really plant-based meats in general, but specifically Beyond Meat's, plant-based meat, on the effect of all sorts of different factors on health.
Yeah.
So we're going to find out once and for all, so we can end all of that FUD that I keep seeing on Twitter. Every time I tweet about Beyond Meat, there's always someone that says there's too many chemicals, or it's way too processed, and I'm like, eating meat is heavily processed as well,
Yeah.
right? the to produce the meat, there has to be a number of chemical processes that happen inside the cow's body to end up with that end result, which is the red meat.
Exactly. And
So
I've had the same problem with people I've known for years regarding plant-based dairy, and they want to cut out dairy because they started getting a lot of issues with like arthritis and different kind of issues with their tendons. And when I tell them to try to get off that dairy product because it's been proven quite a long time now what kind of issues you can have in your body whilst drinking conventional milk. And they start drinking soy milk or almond milk or oat milk, and then they look at the sugar content and they're like, "No, I'm not going to take it because it's way too much sugar." And it's funny that they don't realize that actual lactose is sugar. It's
it's sugar. Yeah.
and you can use the word that is natural sugar, but then we can go to the discussion: how natural is it that we actually go to another species to eat their secrete? So it becomes a kind of a yeah meaningless discussion. What's healthier than the other? So
Yeah.
but so but so when we if we move on then just to the KFC deal. So we found out, yeah, what was it? Yesterday now that they're going to be at 4,000 locations now, temporary. And I'm just going to check if I can get that here on the screen. Yes, Beyond gets the call, right? So, and it starts now on Monday, I think, when I go back to work on the 10th.
Hmm.
So when they're talking about temporary, they were talking about that it's until they sell out, basically. So what kind of time frame do you think that is?
So they remember they did this in 2019. There was that test run.
Yeah,
I believe it was like just a very few number of KFCs, like in the Atlanta area, I believe it was,
yeah, and then in
and sold
Nashville,
out.
yeah, exactly.
Right.
Mm.
So, and it's funny because I saw like photos of it, and lines were out the door.
Yeah,
And I jokingly said on Twitter that, like, when was the last time you had lines out of the door at a KFC?
yeah,
Right. KFC is an old school restaurant like McDonald's. People are not rushing to get to get into that place. So there's never been that level of excitement and buzz and enthusiasm
right.
at a KFC since when they debuted that Beyond Fried Chicken at KFC. So I think they're going to sell out fast. Um, Not at all locations because in the U.S. the demographics are very very different. Depending on the geography that you're in. So
Yeah.
I don't know. We'll see though. We'll see what happens. But I think in densely populated areas they will sell out. In the more rural areas, that's where we'll see what the response is looking like here.
Yeah.
But I'm going to personally go to a few of those, so I'm going to do a little bit of my own sort of due diligence and go to both KFCs at in major cities
Yeah.
as well as KFCs in the middle of nowhere, in more rural areas.
So you're going to do
So
your
in
part to
more,
sponsor the with getting up those revenues.
yeah, yeah. So I just want to go there. So I did this back when Beyond Meat was at Dunkin' Donuts, right?
Mm,
So that was a huge thing, and so I went. So I live in the Baltimore area,
mm,
and in Baltimore, it's kind of like almost every other city where it's a tale of two cities. There's the very rich parts of the city,
mm.
and then there's the extreme poor parts of the city. So I went to both parts. So I wanted to know like how are very high end upscale people reacting to beyond the Beyond Sausage sandwich at Dunkin'. And then I went to the very very low end parts of Baltimore, right, and asked them, how are people liking the Beyond Sausage
Yeah.
sandwich?
Yeah.
And surprisingly, I got a very good answer at both places. So I went to the low end parts of Baltimore, and they said that they sell out of their inventory about once a week.
Wow.
Once a week, they sell out. So I think there's huge demand, and this is very important because everyone thinks that plant-based chicken is like sort of this high-end product, right? That only shoppers at Whole Foods or other organic grocery store shoppers are into. Not so much. I think everyday people are really open to this idea of going plant-based,
Yeah, it
and they're not
was
vegans. And they're not vegans. They're not tree huggers.
no
They're not
true.
let's save the planet and do all this stuff. They're just like, okay, let's try it out, and yeah, I think it's good, so let's have more of it.
Exactly.
That's the type of people that Ethan Brown is going after, right? The everyday people that aren't necessarily tree huggers or environmental activists
Yeah.
necessarily, but casual people that do want to make a change in their diet.
Exactly. Yeah, I've been talking about that since I've been vegan for about 10 years and then vegetarian before that for 10 years. I haven't eaten meat for about 20 years. And the fun thing is that the first couple of times that I started really eating Beyond Meat more and more, especially since I became an investor, I realized that I wasn't enjoying it first because the flavor and the way it kind of like when you're frying it, it kind of reminded me of this meaty smell. Not that I think it's anything wrong with that, but it's just it doesn't appeal to me.
Yeah.
And I had a problem with eating it. Now I don't know if we actually in Sweden probably have the last half year version 3.0 because either I've just gotten used to it, but now I actually love it more than any other product because we have quite a few products here in Sweden, and I'm really loving it. The flavor, the consistency, the texture. But it's quite obvious, like you said, it is not for. It's not meant for vegans or plant-based. And I think that's the smart move because you want to disrupt the whole industry. You want to make people. That's how you solve the problem, right? With too many people eating too much meat, right? You gotta find a product for them.
Yeah.
They had a discussion. I don't know if you watched the All In podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, I might make a video on that soon. But the Friedberg, kind of in my eyes, the genius in the group. Basically, I didn't know that he seems to be vegan, and he and Shamat got into it because Shamat keeps always joking about eating meat and using fur and different clothes, and he got into a heated debate about that. And
Well,
basically,
I didn't see that episode. I got to see that now.
yeah, that's the last episode. The last two episodes to actually have it. Episode 60, Friedberg talks about the worst company in the world, which is basically Tyson Foods and agriculture, animal agriculture. And I was like, whoa, he actually talks about this. And then in the next episode, they talked about it again because, yeah, he had gotten crap from in the comments about it, and he wanted to go into it even more. And then
Yeah.
Shamat.
That's interesting that it's interesting that Friedberg is the one that's vegan because he's the life sciences guy on
Yeah.
that. So
So
that's really, really interesting.
yeah, it is. He really believes in genetics, I think, and cloning meat, kind of like Eat Just. So he didn't mention Beyond Meat or anything like that, but he basically said when we can have a product that kind of like people like Shamat can really love, that's when we have the game changer. And I think if anyone who's working with that right now, it would be Ethan Brown, right? So
Yeah.
so I think we'll see that sooner or later.
Yeah, exactly. But like for in terms of the KFC deal, like the interesting thing that got me was so the president of KFC, the U.S. Based president of KFC, his name is Kevin Hochman. It's telling that he said, as on the went on the record and said that, quote, this is really about where the consumer is going, the customer is going.
Yeah,
They want to eat more plant-based proteins.
exactly.
So, that's very, very interesting that KFC, of all, restaurants, which, at least if this was coming from, I don't know, Subway or like a sandwich shop,
Yeah,
at least some other restaurant that has vegetarian options currently, if they were saying that, I guess that would make sense.
yeah,
But KFC is nowhere close to being, accommodative to vegetarians
No.
or vegans, unless if you get like, I don't know, mashed potatoes or something.
I actually went to a KFC in the city that I live close to just last week to see if they've gotten anything vegan there, and there wasn't even anything vegetarian there. So
Okay. Right. So it's very telling that someone at KFC, at least a high up at KFC, is saying that
yeah,
they recognize that the customer is going towards plant-based protein.
yeah,
So
exactly.
that's huge in my view.
So yeah, you talked about that in the Discord too. That the only thing that you found a little sad is that we're only going to right now see those products in KFC, right, in the deal and the branded deal, which we have to remember this is a branded deal, right, which is amazing for Beyond, because that means that people are going to open their eyes to just the very brand. And it's the same thing with the UK deal, where we had
Mhm.
someone, Emmanuel, who's a fellow YouTuber, a friend of mine. He actually showed that in the UK now, in the drive-through, you see it directly there, the McPlant that is with Beyond Meat, which is a good sign.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, but yeah, like you said, we are only going to see this product right now in the KFC, and it would be perfect to see them in the stores. But we have to realize that this is not. I think a lot of people thought that this would be those chicken tenders that they came out with during the summer, but it's not. It's a whole new product that kind of mimics muscle, so you get that real chicken breast sensation. My understanding is.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing to remember, to just contrast here. Yeah, so it's not the chicken tender, which
Yeah,
is what we're already like used to seeing. So that's available at retail locations right now.
yeah,
Um, but this is not that. So
no,
I think there's a difference in the way that it is made.
yeah,
Um, and so you know, ultimately, Beyond Meat and any manufacturer has to play this tricky balance of how can they produce the best tasting product,
mm,
but at the same time, how can they control the cost of production?
yeah,
And what Ethan Brown said is that the chicken tender, which has already been available, um, is the cheapest way to produce sort of a mock chicken, a plant
right,
based mock chicken. But what they did with KFC is a completely different process, which does, it sounds like, increase the cost of making it.
yeah,
But it replicates the muscle of chicken,
yeah,
the way that everybody's used to having it feel when
mm,
they bite into that,
yeah,
at say a KFC or others. So I can't speak from experience because I haven't had chicken my entire life, so I don't know what that might be like. But that's the based on the commentary from all the different press releases and from earlier stories from over the summer. It sounds like there's two options that Beyond Meat has developed in house, and one of them has really almost essentially cracked the code in replicating the taste and the mouthfeel of chicken,
yeah,
of the chicken breast,
yeah,
right? Of the muscle, the fibers, the way it feels when you bite into it. They've cracked the code on that,
yeah.
but they haven't launched it nationwide or anywhere else because of the cost.
All right. So,
So
so this
now
is going
at
to be like the
KFC,
version 2.0 of the chicken breast.
yeah,
Yeah. All right.
exactly, the 2.0, right?
Yeah.
So this is the only thing that I have sort of a that's my only concern about this deal is that while it's awesome all around,
Mhm.
remember the margins for Beyond Meat are made at the retail level. That's where their margins are a lot better
Yeah.
compared to food service.
Yeah.
Because obviously with food service, you have to share. You have to do a revenue split with the restaurant, and obviously you don't have to do that with at retail locations. So you do get a little bit more margin from that.
Yeah.
So the idea of going into food service, into restaurants, for Beyond Meat has always been about building visibility, right? About building the brand,
Right.
about convincing the masses that plant-based protein is tasty and can replicate the taste and texture of meat, without the downsides of consuming meat,
Yeah.
right? So that's a halo effect that they could have for themselves,
Yeah.
right? Which is huge. But ultimately, the goal is to make money, right? You can't run losses in perpetuity.
No.
So they have to make up that by driving volume at retail.
Yeah.
And if this new chicken product is only going to be available at KFC and not available for purchase at retail locations, then I really hope that they are going to make, um, good enough margins just from KFC alone.
Yeah. But my thought there is that whatever happens, I mean, because first I'm like, what would the reason be for them not eventually, anyways, after this deal with KFC, start selling them in retails? It might be that this whole production has been in collaboration with KFC as a branded KFC product as well. So maybe they wouldn't allow it, and maybe they will actually start selling them as a co-branded product in the stores. But even if that wouldn't happen anytime soon, I'm thinking that they've kind of proven to the world what they can do now, right? Technologically and from a scientific point of view, which I feel that should tell us something, and they can just move on from that, right? And like you're basically talking about, maybe keep doing something similar and then create a product that would be to some extent price parity to a ordinary chicken breast. And maybe it doesn't have to be only fried, right? That it could be something you could do something with yourself, grill it and having a healthier version. Because like I normally say that, most things fried taste good. Like it's hard to, with sugar or frying something, it's going to taste good no matter what. The trick is to get it to taste good, without having all that lard.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, exactly. And that's the thing that Ethan Brown talks about on almost every earnings call is that there is a trifecta that they have to perfect:
Yeah.
the taste, the nutrition, and the cost.
Yeah.
If they can get all three aligned, that's cracking the code in elevating plant-based meat to consume, or to generate a huge market share of the massive meat industry, which is that $1.4 trillion global industry.
Yeah.
So if they can get these three things aligned, then that is the key to achieving their goals, right?
Yeah.
Which is to reduce meat consumption.
Exactly.
That's basically what we want to try to do here.
Yeah.
And hopefully with increased production, we can bring that unit cost, further down, just like what we see with other companies like Tesla, for example.
Yeah, exactly. And I feel like they are focusing on that in many ways, especially now when they actually have a second research center now, also in Shanghai, right?
Yeah.
And one in, what's it called? Let's see. Should I share your screen here?
Oh, yeah, I think I just have my screen here.
Yeah.
Yeah, just back on that revenue chart.
Yeah, no worries. All right,
Sorry,
guys.
what were you saying?
Yeah, so basically, yeah, they have one R&D place in Manhattan, California, right? Or the project is called the Manhattan Project, right?
Right, yeah.
Yeah, which is interesting considering, the nuclear bomb Manhattan Project from that. But but I guess that's going to be part of changing the world to some extent as well. But yeah, but so, and it's the same thing. How many facilities do they have now? Because my understanding is that they're supposed to have two facilities in China, one in the Netherlands, and then one in Pennsylvania. I think that, so it should be around 4 or 5 in totality right now.
Yes, and yeah, we can actually just pull that up from the their 10K. We can actually look at all the facilities that they do have,
Yeah.
and that should be disclosed there. In fact, well, the 10K is going to be out sometime in the next month or so once we complete 2021 here.
Yeah.
Once Q4 is reported. But yeah, we should have some commentary on like the progress of those facilities, and and then and get some more feedback as to what the production ramp at these places are.
Right.
There are also a lot of these are also R&D facilities too. So it's not just manufacturing, but also for R&D. That's going to be obviously key for iteration. And that's another thing that Beyond Meat is just another interesting way of thinking about it, because what the products that they have today, it's not steady. It's not steady state. Where like here it is, and hope everybody likes it. It's constantly being iterated
Yeah.
on taste and texture, right?
Exactly.
And that's why they continuously invest in in R&D facilities to get closer and closer to replicating the taste and texture of meat.
Right. So yeah, that's also a problem that I have with some people, some larger YouTubers out there that kind of claim that they don't see Beyond Meat as a good buy right now, or haven't before, anyways, until it flew down as much as it have now, because they don't feel that they're innovative enough. And compared to, we've talked about Tattoo Chef, and I think they have out like 70 or 80 SKUs, but that for me doesn't mean innovation per se, depending on how you define innovation, right? For me, innovation is making the product you have as good as possible and improving upon it. And when it's the perfect product, then you start moving into other areas and other products.
Yeah, and that's actually where it's fascinating because of this partnership with Pepsi as well.
Mm,
So this is another thing to point out. Beyond Meat actually has a very strong pipeline.
mm.
People think that where's all this growth going to come from? Well, this pipeline is quite strong that they have in place.
Yeah,
So obviously, KFC is a huge news this week. McDonald's is obviously another mega deal that they're working on that should come through this year.
yeah,
Um, but also with Pepsi, right? Pepsi is another juggernaut of the food industry.
right.
So it's fascinating. When that came out, I was really floored because I never thought that entering the snack business would be something that Beyond Meat had in the cards at this point in time.
Yeah, they're probably coming out soon with beef jerky, because we've seen some traits of that in some stations all in some parts of the U.S. And there's talk about that they're going to probably place them at 170,000 locations in the U.S. These beef jerkies.
Yeah.
I've even seen higher numbers, which is obviously probably not the most expensive product, maybe not the best margin, but it's still incredible to then that people just start buying them at these locations where they might not even have heard of this brand. So that in itself, I think, is an amazing achievement.
Yeah, exactly. And so this is the other interesting thing too, is because so like you can just see here. I don't know if you can if
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah. We can
readable.
see it.
But yeah, so the partnership with the Planet partnership,
Yeah, which
which is
is
that
which is the
yeah, it's
combined partnership with PepsiCo, right?
exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah. So on January 25th, we entered into the Planet partnership, a joint venture with PepsiCo to develop, produce, and market innovative snack and beverage products made from plant-based protein.
yeah,
We believe TPP will allow us to reach more consumers by entering new product categories and distribution channels, increasing accessibility to plant-based protein around the world. For the 3 and 9 months ended October 2nd, 2021, we recognized our share of the net losses in TPP in the amount of 0.6 million and 1.2 million, respectively. No such amounts were recognized in the 3 and 9 months ended September 26, 2020.
yeah,
So, this is interesting because obviously the TPP is losing money right now. They haven't really started, generating a ton of revenue yet. So most of these losses are mostly due to startup costs, I'm assuming. But because it's a joint venture with Pepsi, Pepsi is going to want to get this profitable pretty quickly.
yeah,
And so, because of that, and because obviously they own equity in this new joint venture, this LLC right here, I think this will be a good contributor to to profits
Yeah.
for Beyond Meat. So that's going to be reported on Beyond Meat's financial statements as well.
Yeah.
So that should be interesting to see what happens there with what types of snacks are rolled out. Right? You mentioned the beef, the sort of the beef jerky.
Yeah.
Um, so
And
we'll see what else comes out.
and when you look at the LinkedIn page for the because this plant partnership, they have their own LinkedIn page where they actually are trying to find people of from different areas of production, and it seems that there's several points of evidence there now that they're really looking into dairy alternatives. And since I think it was back in August, Beyond actually registered for. Um, let's see, registered for about 100 or 109 different trademarks, and a big one of them was Beyond Milk,
Yeah,
and then working with PepsiCo, and PepsiCo basically said when they started this deal or this made it official about the partnership about a year ago that it would be some kind of plant-based uh, drinkables. And again, Pepsi and different sodas, that's already plant-based. They don't need Beyond Meat for that, like Beyond Cola.
right,
So
right.
so for
Well,
me,
keep in mind though, so Pepsi has experience with refrigerated drinks because they own Tropicana, right, which is the orange juice brand
yeah,
that Pepsi owns. So I don't know how it is in Sweden, but like in the U.S. grocery stores, orange juice, all the juices are right next to the milk
mm,
in the refrigerated section. So they have that distribution channels already established at thousands and thousands of grocery stores. So it would make sense that the Planet Partnership would also be working on a plant-based milk product, because that would be very easy for Pepsi to then place into
their
countless different
distribution. It
exactly.
Yeah, because it's the I keep telling people that the people first they think about PepsiCo and they think like, well, it's sodas, and maybe they have some crisps, but I mean it's the second largest food company in the world, with an incredible. They're worth over 200, 250 billion dollars, and yeah, the valuation, anyways. And I mean, so the connections they have would be limitless to some extent. So
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I,
it's huge.
yeah, it is. It is. So it's going to be really interesting to see how that follows out. So if we then, because there are some other things I want to talk to you about, but we've talked. Me and Mayur, we talked that I want him to be a regular on the channel every now and then, so we can talk about what's going on with Beyond Meat, and maybe we could have a talk about Oatly soon also, and other plant-based companies. And one thing I would want to, but I feel we need a separate video for that with time, is talking about the Tesla, some comparison there. And you had a really interesting thing you talked about in the Discord regarding that Tesla was flat for 2 years. So, okay, I see you're sharing something here now. Let's see.
Yeah. I actually had a slide that's already kind of made regarding this, but
Yeah.
I see a lot of parallels between the two companies. Obviously, no two companies are ever the same. There's obviously vastly different challenges, but there's a couple of things that I've noticed. Right, they're both led by owner operators. They both have a lot of skin in the game. The vast majority of Ethan Brown's net worth is the value of his stock in Beyond Meat. Same thing with Elon Musk. Both are attacking staggering, deeply embedded industries, autos and the meat industry. They're both massive industries. In fact, they're almost the same in size, roughly 1.4 trillion each.
Yeah.
And both of them are contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, right? So the meat industry is notorious for this as well. And there's a number of documentaries on Netflix and others that have talked about this.
Yeah.
And people don't think about this, but the meat industry, or at least the seafood industry, just deals just a lot of damage to the oceans.
Yeah.
Um, and this cannot continue. It really can't. the way that the trajectory that we're going on with using acres and acres and acres of land to raise livestock and feed them things that they're not meant to eat,
Yeah.
and then use antibiotics and other things like that. Some people say, well, you can solve this problem if you just go to sustainably raised meat or organic meat, or there are ways to raise livestock in a much more environmentally friendly way. And I'm sympathetic to that view. I'm not a vegan, sort of, missionary. I'm not militant in my veganism.
Yeah.
But my response to those people that say that there are ways to make meat sustainable is that, well, why hasn't it happened?
Yeah.
Right there, they do have it. Right,
Yeah.
it's there, but no one has been able to scale it. No one's been able to scale sustainably raised meat. It's
No.
always available in very low quantities at very high prices.
Right.
So Ethan Brown has said that, okay, since no one can do this, and because this is it's a persistent problem that seems to be getting worse and worse as we go on, as the population increases and we need more and more meat production. None of these people that are evangelists on sustainably raised, beef and pork and chicken have ever been able to, mass produce it.
Yeah. It's
And now we're going to take matters into our own hands and make a plant-based protein that is nutritious for you and it has a very, very similar mouthfeel and taste as meat,
yeah.
and provide it to you at the same cost.
Yeah.
That's the key there too, is
Yeah.
cost.
We go to
No
the
one is going to
primary
buy.
source.
Exactly. Yeah. No one's going to be buying $10 a pound, meat, which is where a lot of organic meat is priced.
Yeah.
8 to 9 or $10 a pound. People can't afford that.
All right.
So only the rich can afford it, but the masses won't be able to buy meat at that price.
No.
So there's that. So both are aiming to dramatically reduce greenhouse gas emissions. They're both building economies of scale to reduce these unit costs to make it affordable to average consumers. Right.
Yeah.
In the beginning, Teslas were only the Roadster, which was $150,000 initially. Then they went to the Model S, which is a lot more affordable, but still very high end at $100,000. And then they went into the Model 3, which is half that cost. And that's where, Tesla has gone mainstream, is, in that range. And now they're working on an even cheaper car.
Yeah. $25,
Which
$25,000 product. And I even heard about $18,000, maybe further ahead.
I think that would be because of tax credits. I don't know if they would go that cheap in price, but maybe after federal tax credits, yeah, a $25,000 Tesla could be around $18,000. But yeah, that's the vision. I mean, you can't change the world by making premium products. You just
No.
can't.
No. So
And so that's the thing here. Rapid market share growth, and they're both very early in the the S curve, right? Electric vehicles are still only 2% of all total cars sold. Plant-based meat is even less than that. It's like 0.1%, if even that.
and it's good
So
that
very, very early on.
and it's good that you mentioned that, because another question was regarding, are you worried regarding that probably we'll see given this market this year, but probably we'll see impossible IPOing, right? And a lot of people are really nervous that that could be a, a big competition. That what's your assessment on that? What's your thinking?
I want to reserve judgment until I see the S1 filing, because I've been impossible is has been frustrating to me, because they've been talking about this for years. For years, and they still haven't IPO'd. And we just had the hottest market in a generation since the year 2000, right? With all of these SPACs going public, all of these IPOs going public, everybody getting the richest multiples you could possibly ask for, and Impossible was still just sitting around, not doing anything with it.
Yeah.
And now that bubble has burst, right? All these companies that used to trade at 30 times sales are now down 50, 60, 70% from the highs, and still no IPO, right? So I think they've missed the opportunity to do it, or at least to
Yes.
get a very strong valuation. Oatly did it, right?
Yeah.
Oatly did it, and they did it the right way. They got the IPO out. They raised a really, a lot of money at a very high multiple. So that's good for Oatly.
Yeah.
Obviously, Oatly shares are down, but it's good for the company because they were able to raise, equity at a very rich multiple.
Right.
But Impossible is still nowhere to be seen.
Yeah, it's
And so
fun.
that makes me think that maybe there's something wrong with Impossible. I don't know.
Yeah, the interesting part is because people keep thinking that, yeah, like you said, if they're actually going to IPO, then we'll find out a couple months before what kind of sales they've actually had, because they're private companies. We don't get access to that, and some people seem to think that their sales is kind of like equivalent to Beyond, and we've seen how many restaurants and how many shops they have, and they're basically half to if you put them all together to what Beyond has. So I would find it surprising if they were close to the same revenue. I can't see that happening at the moment. I don't think.
Yeah, I don't think that's the case either.
No.
I really don't. At this point, because they sat out the last year and a half of a red hot market,
Mm.
I think they're going through something. I mean, I don't know. It's all speculation. There's no way to know until we see their actual S1 filing. But, I would be shocked if they, were even, 75% of the revenue that Beyond Meat is at, if even that.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that people seem to, I don't know, misunderstand Pat Brown, because he's actually said on several occasions that he doesn't see Pat Brown and Ethan Brown. They're not related, but he doesn't see Ethan or Beyond Meat as a competition, because he thinks they're both striving to go against the animal agriculture industry, right? Which is huge.
Yeah,
So there's so much room for new players, and because the whole plant-based sector is still in its infancy. I mean, it's growing a little more now. The competition is coming there, but I think the big competition would still be legacy food companies when it comes to the actual meat, not what they produce in plant-based products.
right. And that's the right way to go about thinking about it
Mm.
too. I think that's the best way to, think about it is, people, I keep seeing this over and over again with Tesla, for example. Like, the Tesla bears kept saying, oh, Mercedes is coming out with their electric, SUV. Ford and GM are working on this. Volkswagen is working on this. They're all going to take share away from Tesla. Oh, this is the new Tesla killer.
Yeah,
And it's like, why does it always have to be Tesla, and why can't it be a killer of their existing gas cars?
yeah,
Right? The existing petrol cars are also, subject to competition, right?
yeah,
There's one consumer, and he has, let's say $50,000. That $50,000 is only going to go to one car,
right,
and it could be either a petrol burning car or an electric car.
right.
So if Mercedes does come out with an electric car, great. That could take away share from their other petrol cars. Why does it have to be only Tesla, right?
Yeah,
So this type of thinking is, what leads to paralysis
mm,
in being able to analyze data,
yeah,
because electric cars are fundamentally better than petrol burning cars are.
yeah,
And so, this is going to a market share of 100%. Now, with plant-based meat, I don't think it's going to 100%, but I think the market is so large and the companies are so small as of right now that, even if they get to 10% market share, which Barclays believes that they will, I think I have a slide on that. Here's the total addressable market. It's 1.4 trillion dollar market, overall,
yeah,
the global meat industry. Barclays thinks that it could get to 10% by the end of the decade.
yeah,
So that's $140 billion opportunity,
yeah.
whereas it's at 1% today,
A-
right? Alternative meat slice of the global industry.
And it gets even
So,
more interesting when we put in dairy there too, because I think dairy is between 600 to, depending on numbers, 600 to 800 billion-dollar industry right now, and you put them together, we're over 2 trillion. And when these like Oatly, and then if Beyond also moves into actually starting with dairy products, and people are like, oh, that's not possible. Then we have Oatly, and that's not good. Again, really, there's such a huge market there. So I think it was you who talked about that. Right now, I think the big dairy companies, they have a revenue of about $10 billion.
10 billion. Yeah.
Yeah, so plenty of room, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's huge room.
Mm.
So that's the reason why I love Oatly as well, and I own shares of Oatly now. I just bought it for the first time, a very small position, but
Mm.
I did get in at around $8 a share.
Mm.
Um, but the thing about Oatly though is that they have an easier path towards gaining market share than Beyond Meat,
Mm.
because people are a lot more open to plant-based milk right now than they are plant-based meat,
Yeah.
because obviously everyone loves their beef and chicken and pork, right? And to replace that is going to take a lot of convincing. um, but to replace dairy milk is not that big of an ask for
Right.
most people.
Right.
And so people are naturally gravitating towards that. And oat milk is a great sort of offering, because everyone knows oats. Everyone has had oatmeal, growing up as a kid. Everyone's all parents feed their kids oatmeal, right? So everyone is familiar with oats. So it's a very easy transition, and plus Oatly just tastes great. So I think Oatly has a easier path towards gaining market share than Beyond Meat.
Mm.
Beyond Meat still has to deal with a lot of convincing, a lot of skepticism. However, the downside of Oatly though is that I don't think that they have as strong of a moat
Mm.
that Beyond Meat does,
Mm.
because oat milk ultimately is going to be commoditized. Now, you can say that Oatly has a strong brand, and brands can also be a very good moat. And
Mm.
that's definitely true. But dairy milk, for example, does have many strong brands in it as well. And you don't see any single dairy producer command too much market share.
Right.
You don't have like two companies that own the global dairy industry. It's a lot more fragmented than that,
Right.
and it's because dairy is a commodity. You can slap a logo onto it and have a recognizable brand, but ultimately consumers don't see that big of a difference between brands of milk. Um, you can help your sales a little bit, and I think, for example, Horizon in the U.S. does that. Horizon Organic Milk, that's a really good brand. So Oatly is going to have that, but I don't see Oatly becoming too much bigger than a $10 billion annual run rate for revenue.
Right.
Now, I'd love to be wrong about that,
Mm.
but I think that's sort of the baseline as what I expect Oatly to do, is roughly $10 billion in revenue. Whereas Beyond Meat, I think the upside is much bigger than that, because of how big the meat industry is and how hard it is to do what Beyond Meat has done.
Right. So, but I mean, $10 billion revenue. I mean, if we're talking about the next 10 years or 15 years, still amazing. I mean,
That's still, yeah, it's huge. It's
and that
still
would give
huge.
them a PS right now about what, 0.4 or something like that, zero point 0.5 at this moment. And I'm guessing the typical dairy companies right now are like meat companies that normally are between PS1 and PS 1.5 or something like that. So,
Yeah.
but then when you have a company like Oatly, given the kind of research they put in and growth company and disruptive companies, yeah, they probably could have a higher multiple there anyhow.
Yeah, I think they will have a higher multiple. Both Beyond Meat and Oatly will, I believe, will always have a higher multiple than the old the dinosaurs of the industries, because they're both going to be significantly less capital intensive.
Yeah,
Right, meat production is very capital intensive,
yeah,
and you need a much bigger supply chain. Whereas, for example, Beyond Meat, actually shares this on their website. But they require 99% less water, 93% less land,
yeah,
fewer greenhouse gas emissions, 46% less energy than the equivalent of a meat-based burger.
Yeah.
So this is where, this is obviously very plain language that everybody can understand, but from a financial standpoint, from an analyst viewpoint, what this means is that for every dollar of revenue that they generate, they will require investments that are significantly less than the meat industry does,
Right.
right? So this is the concept of ROIC, return on invested capital, right?
Yeah.
Um, for example, two companies could both be doing $100,000 of net income per year, right? Let's say you have two businesses that you're looking to buy, two very small businesses, each do $100,000 of net profit every single year.
Right.
But one business costs you $1 million to buy the business, and the other business costs you $2 million to buy the business, right? All things held equal, the one that costs you $1 million is the better deal,
Yeah.
right? Because your ROIC is 10%. The ROIC for the other one is 5%.
Right.
So the one that has the higher ROIC is the one that's going to be ultimately valued at a premium, because the input costs are a lot less
Yeah.
to
So
produce
getting
the same
those
pellet.
production costs as low as possible, but still having a great product. That's the key here.
Right,
Yeah. So
exactly.
definitely. So if we wrap this up then for this time, so otherwise I'm gonna have to change the title, like for 2022. Do you
Yeah.
see? We've talked a lot here, of course, but do you see that it's a possibility that we could see Beyond breaking out now this year in 2022 to some
I
extent?
think so. I do think so. I think the sort of this whole decline in the stock is a re-rating in the valuation. I actually always have been I've been a huge fan of Beyond Meat for years, but I never owned the stock because I always believed that the multiple was very, very rich.
Yeah.
When you look at the price to sales, or a better multiple is price to gross profit,
Yeah.
which factors in your gross margins. It was always trading at a very rich multiple, like 50, 60 times gross profit,
Right.
which is very high. My rule of thumb usually is, if whatever your multiple is to gross profit, your revenue growth better be at least double that. So, like, if you are at, say, an enterprise to gross profit multiple of, say, 25 times, then you better be growing revenue at 50% per year.
Right.
That's just a rule of thumb. There's nothing scientific or magical about that, but it just gives you a nice control over what price you're paying for the stock that you're buying.
Right.
And so that's why, when Beyond Meat was in the upper 100s to even 200, I thought that the multiple was, untouchable at that point.
Yeah.
So I never bought it until it dropped to about 130 is where my first purchase price was. And so
Yeah.
that's still my, I sort of allowed my heart to override my brain.
Yeah.
Because I want this company to succeed so much, and I wanted to see this, at 90 so I could buy it. But I was, just waited, never got there, and now it did, of course, after I buy it.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm just buying more. I'm just buying more now.
Yeah,
Um,
you talked about that when I talked to you regarding. I have basically the same average about. It's about 130 to 140, and but you talked about that. Could we see it drop even more from now? And you said yes, and I think a lot of us probably think that that's a possibility given what's happened now. But kind of like I normally talk about too, even though I want to see the company fly up because I want people to be happy. But you're kind of enjoying this time, aren't you?
yeah, it's a great time right now, especially because it's up 12.5% now
Yeah.
as we speak here. So this could be a possibility where we do have a violent short squeeze. That's definitely possible. So, that could take the stock back up to $100 in a very short time. because of how just incredibly shorted the stock is right now.
Yeah.
So if it does have a couple of really good pieces of news like KFC, or if there are news reports that you know most KFCs are sold out in the first day or so, maybe that'll provide additional fuel.
Yeah.
And then if we get the McDonald's announcement, that could be the big one,
Yeah.
the huge catalyst. So I think shorts are playing with fire right now because the stock is down heavily
Yeah.
at this point. And we're getting at the same time some very, very good news that we haven't seen in a long time.
Right.
So shorts are very, very, they're playing a risky game right now. And on top of that, Beyond Meat is approaching this technically significant level of $50 a share. You can see multiple times it got this low,
Yeah.
and it refused to sell off any more than that.
Right.
So that could happen again, where that level is defended once again, and that could happen. That makes sense because remember, for the stock to be at $50 today, which is the same price that it was at during the depths of the COVID crash and right near the IPO, means that the stock is actually much cheaper today than it was at either of those other 2 points when it was at $50, because the revenue base is much higher
Right.
today than it was back then, right? So on a price to sales multiple basis, we see significant multiple compression here.
Right. Yeah, it's like I told
Um,
my community this morning that I think that these prices before this drop yesterday, a total of I guess 15% or from where it started around 5%. And I think before that drop, the price comparatively this last 52 weeks looks very attractive. So if it drops even more, I don't know what we're going to call that, but I mean, as long as they execute and they keep getting the deals now, and we might see 13th. What do you think? Are we going to see a McPlant launch in the U.S. now? National? Are we going to see a 13,000 location launch, or is it only going to be around 800?
I think it's going to be. I think it's a done deal. I think they're going to do it. I think they're going to go national with it,
Okay.
because they see others doing this. They see Burger King already did it with Impossible. They've already committed nationwide in the UK. So you know, I think they're getting ready to do it. Nationwide.
Yeah, it would be weird
So,
otherwise, considering that they did this 8 city trial now in November, and
mhm.
when different analysts researched what feedback was, it was incredible. Everything worked really well. The way they produced them in the bar and the way they handled everything with the service, and then the way people responded. I mean, why wouldn't they want to be part of this kind of paradigm shift starting to happen? I mean, they're all about the money, like most companies. So why would they hesitate?
Yeah, and keep in mind also, for a product to be successful, companies can't just go half-assed into it and then hope that it does well, right?
Right.
You can't have a launch of a major new product at half your stores
Yeah.
and expect it to succeed,
Yeah.
right? The only way products succeed commercially, with consumers, is if you go all in with it.
Right.
You put your heart into it. You actively market it. You highlight it front and center, right? You tell people about it. You don't want it to be one of those items that's like, oh, there's a separate vegetarian menu that we have, so please ask for it if
Yeah.
you want that. No, if it's like that, it's always going to remain a niche,
Yeah.
right? So it's up to McDonald's. Do they want to sell this, or do they not want to sell it?
Right.
Do they want revenue growth? Do they want to tap into a new demographic that otherwise would never step into a McDonald's, right? If they
And
do,
that
then they should be actively marketing it.
that takes us to the whole subsidy question, because I know Ethan has been talking about that he doesn't care about tax credits, or that we should have subsidies when it comes to cars and things like that. And I'm guessing he means it should be the same for everything. And I've been thinking or hoping that it would make sense that normally after a while, considering what's going on with the environment and all the research that's out there and the health crisis, that sooner or later we'll see subsidies going away from the actual meat industry and dairy industry to plant-based industry instead. and that would be like something that would really fly up then. But in Ethan's way of thinking, to be honest, if they just took away the subsidies from the meat industry, considering that when you go buy a burger at McDonald's, that price that you're paying, I guess you can buy like what a $1.5 or $2 burger. It's not the actual price of that burger.
Yeah.
It's us taxpayers, be it meat eaters or vegans alike, we all pay that price.
Yeah.
And if we take away that and we get the actual price of creating it, and then when you go in and really look to how much more efficient it is to use grains and beans and lentils, and how much cheaper that would be, and when it comes to water and energy use and land use, I mean, that would be the cheaper version anyhow.
Yeah. Exactly.
So
And that's why Tesla doesn't need tax credits to produce a very affordable car,
exactly.
right? It's the electric vehicle is just so much simpler than the internal combustion engine, right? There's far fewer parts. There's far fewer moving parts in the car itself. Everything is software driven as opposed to manual, hardware. And that's why we see, the price of electric cars come down so much over the past 5 to 10 years.
Right.
And Beyond Meat is a very similar case where, again, you have a situation where you require significantly less land, less energy, less water. Um, so the input costs are so much less
Yeah.
than the behemoth process of meat production, right?
Right.
With raising, millions of livestock, feeding them for years,
Yeah.
getting them fattened up, and then slaughtering them, and then producing them, processing the meat after that. It's a grotesque industry, in my opinion, just my humble opinion.
Yeah.
But we have, for the first time ever, a viable alternative to that. And I think the masses are finally going to see that there is something that they can have that doesn't require, killing animals,
Right.
to do it.
Yeah. So it's basically solving the problem that if people don't want to stop eating because they love it for the pleasure of eating it and the taste, and it's a cultural factor too. But if you can have something that is similar to it, why would you want to kill it then? Considering what time of age we live in, right? So we're not a hunter-gathering society anymore, most of us, anyways, in the world. So yeah, it makes sense. I don't know. Some people are asking here, should we ask some questions? What they've asked here in the comments, depending on your time. Should we pick a few of them?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So where in which stores? That's from March of 9th here. Where or in which stores can I buy these Beyond products? Never been able to buy all of them at one store. It always feels like a treasure hunt. All right. So
the simplest way is just check out beyondmeat.com. They have a store locator.
Yeah.
So you can enter in your zip code wherever you are located, and it'll tell you exactly what stores near you have Beyond products. I can tell. I mean, if you're in the United States, just about every grocery store at this point has the Beyond Burger and has Beyond Beef,
right.
the 1 pound beef package. I've never been to a grocery store at this point that does not have that. So it's very strong distribution that they have now at this point. But yeah, if you want something more specific, I just went to Walmart the other day, and they also have the chicken tenders. So I saw that actually for the first time. I've been looking to where I can get that.
Yeah.
So my at least my local Walmart in the Baltimore area has the Beyond chicken tenders.
All right.
So
Are they good?
I have not tried it yet. I
Okay.
just got it actually, so
All right.
I need to try that. Yeah.
Cool. I don't know if we've gotten them in Sweden yet. We usually tend to be a little slower here. So when it comes to that point, anyways. So and someone Marcus here, I've lost all my money and beyond. Let's buy more, guys. Okay, committed. I like that. And
Yeah,
someone
you haven't lost it because you haven't sold, so you
no,
haven't lost.
hopefully. And here, I think we talked about this. How profitable is the McDonald's deal for Beyond? Yeah, so we have to actually see more before, and find out more when it comes to the margins. Now, I guess it would be the best, like we talked about in the Q1 report. That'll probably be in April or May. So we'll find out more there. To be clear, someone says here, the 200 million estimate in is revenue directly to Beyond. Okay, that's the Peter Saleh's estimate from BITG. Did not actually. Did you know that or?
Yeah, so I didn't know whether so he was assuming the $5 per pound, you know, selling price. So I didn't know if that was the $5 per pound that customers pay, or if that's $5 per pound that McDonald's was paying to Beyond Meat.
All right.
So that was a question that I had in terms of what his estimates were.
Right.
I assumed that that would be what the customer pays at McDonald's.
Yeah.
Because right now, for example, if you go to most retail locations and buy a pound of Beyond Beef,
Yeah.
you pay roughly $8 on average
Right.
per pound. Sometimes it's on sale for $7. I've seen. So at $5 is what would make sense to get the price down to a McDonald's level price.
Yeah.
Because I believe they're pricing it at parity with the Big Mac too,
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
UK at least. And I think they might want to do that in the US too if they were to go nationwide in the US.
But considering if they're going, like you said, nationwide, like at 13,000, 14,000 locations, and then we have the UK, and we'll see what happens in Europe to begin with. And let's not forget, it's the same with KFC deal. I mean, they have 4,000 locations now, but KFC in the worldwide is 25,000 locations. And it's 14,000 locations with McDonald's in the US, but it's about 38,000 locations worldwide. So if it goes well, we still have a lot more places to be at, actually. So,
Yeah.
and then we have, someone says here, let's see, well, processed and chemicals doesn't mean much anyways. Aspirin is processed chemicals too, and you take it to get healthy. The question is, processed how and which chemicals? Well, I guess that is true to some extent there, but I'm not sure that there would be many today when it comes to research and ways who would say that meat is a healthy product to be especially depending on how much you actually eat. Maybe eating it once a week or something like that, that would be one thing, but 7 days a week. Here, are there any updates on the Planet Partnership? Yeah, well, have we gotten an update when they're actually going to release the beef jerky thing? I don't think so.
No, I don't. I haven't heard that. I don't think they talked about it on the last earnings call either. But we did see that that beef jerky product, right?
Yeah.
The plant-based beef jerky. So that seems like that's going to be one of their first products.
Yeah.
But yeah, we haven't seen any specific updates beyond that.
Yeah.
I believe.
Yeah, it was a question here from brother Alwyn, who says that do we think that this Beyond Jerky will be in price parity with beef jerky? Well,
I don't think so. Because Pepsi is doing this under this joint venture, they're not doing it under the Pepsi brand.
yeah,
If it was under the Pepsi brand, then I would guess that they would want to be at price parity with comparable meat products. But because they're doing it under a joint venture, I believe it's going to be branded differently. It won't be either Pepsi or Beyond Meat branded. It would be its own brand.
Yeah.
Um, and so they may be going for a slightly premium category within snacks. I'm just guessing. I don't know for
Yeah.
sure,
Exactly.
but it sounds like because it's a joint venture and they're not using the Pepsi brand for this company,
Yeah. Exactly.
they may be going for a slightly higher priced product category.
Yeah. And someone says they think it would be awesome if there was a Beyond restaurant chain, just like McDonald's, but entirely plant based. Yeah, I know. We know that a smaller plant based company, the Very Good Food Company out of Canada, who's starting to now explore the US as well, has started to, I think they're at 800 or 1,000 stores now in the US. They have like two restaurants themselves, the Very Good Butcher restaurant, and they're planning to have like some flagship restaurants around the world in the future. But I'm not sure if I see. You never know, but I don't know if I see Beyond actually going into that business at the
Mhm.
moment. If they did, it will be more like I think from an AdSense of perspective, people find out more about them. But I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I don't see them doing that. I think they've got such a big challenge ahead of them already. Their hands are full.
Yeah,
With beef, with continuously iterating on beef and poultry. So the pipeline is super strong at this point. So I wouldn't I'd be shocked if they got into the restaurant, since that requires its own sort of logistics, and then you have to secure other products that they're not making, like bread and other things too. So it would be a whole new supply chain that they'd have to come up with, and then restaurants are only successful if you have like a highly visible chain of them. So that's a whole new sort of level of operating costs that they would have to take on. So I don't see them doing that at this point, at
no.
least.
And it's same here when it comes to doing something else with the business. That from V Cook here, pipeline is key. I could imagine Beyond Meat eventually partners with a cultured meat provider. That would be interesting. Uh, what's your thoughts on
Yeah,
that?
yeah, I've thought about cultured meat a lot. My thoughts is that I think that if Beyond Meat can tackle these three things, that unlocks the secret to tapping into massive market share, which is taste, nutrition, and cost. If they can get that with plant-based protein, then I think cultured meat may not even be necessary.
No.
If they can get the cost down to say $5 a pound, right, which is right in line with regular beef. If they can get the taste, a few more steps beyond where they're at right now,
Right.
and then if the Stanford clinical study comes back and gives it a green light that says that this stuff is really good, this stuff actually improves health outcomes with no adverse effects. If those three things happen, then I don't think cultured meat is going to be necessary.
No.
Like I actually draw a parallel with the battery electric vehicles, right? Battery powered electric cars
Yeah.
versus fuel cell cars, right? The hydrogen fuel cell technology.
Yeah.
The hydrogen fuel cell technology is a very elegant solution and does improve upon the existing, problems that the auto industry, contributes to. But it's an elegant solution that's ultimately unnecessary
Right.
because you're handicapping yourself to one source of energy, which is hydrogen.
Right.
Whereas a battery electric car can charge from any source of energy, be it nuclear or solar or wind or any source of electricity. So, the hydrogen fuel cell car is basically going to be dead on arrival because the battery electric car has already solved what everybody needs.
Yeah.
So
So
I view cultured meat and plant-based meat in a similar way, that if plant-based meat can get to the three things first, then it's going to become the standard, and then cultured meat may not even be a thing.
yeah, it's the same thing that I keep wondering. First, we're like probably a decade away before it could be commercialized to some extent, if not longer. So I think it's actually what I've read about it, anyways, is further. It's going to take longer than people think. And another thing I think about, I'm really happy. I mean, I'm okay with people coming up with more and more companies that's cultured meat because it's better than the alternative, right? Not alternative meat then, but the alternative to have traditional meat because you don't have to kill animals. And I'm guessing, and it's better for the environment. And I'm guessing to some extent it's better for your health. But if it's real meat, right, it's still cholesterol, and it's still animal meat and muscular. If you look at the research in itself, too much of it will start, it's appetizing for cancer cells, basically. So from a health perspective, I wonder still why I would do it. And I wouldn't do it because I haven't eaten meat in so many years. But I still prefer people eating that, of course. But
Yeah.
so that's what I'm wondering about, how good that
Yeah,
would
and
be.
it's also possible that the two kind of coexist too. That's another possibility where, the $1.4 trillion meat market is replaced with plant-based meat and cultured meat.
Mm,
So the market is just so massive. This is why I love these types of investments because the size of these companies are so small
yeah,
relative to the potential, like the size of the industry, that you don't need like 50% market share of global meat in order to be successful, wildly successful as in terms of an investment.
yeah,
So maybe there's a future where, plant-based meat versus cultured meat take a 60-40 share,
yeah.
or even if it's a 70-30 share, right? Still significant upside, for plant-based proteins.
Yeah. And here's a question that we might need to make a different video on in future, but I've been wondering about this for 1.5 years now since I love ARK and I love Cathy Wood. But it's like Lewis Tolman says here, might be misinformed, but are you surprised that the large disruptive funds like ARK or ARK-K haven't invested in Beyond or other plant-based food or drink companies? So what do you say about that?
Yeah, I'm a little surprised at that. I thought that they would do that. I know that ARC did talk about cultured meat at one point on one of their podcasts. I think they did write about this once, so I think they know that they're aware of what is going on here.
Yeah.
From a portfolio management standpoint, they also have to make the decision of you know, do they have better investment opportunities elsewhere? So, the decision to buy Beyond Meat or lack thereof is not necessarily them, thinking that this is not going to work. It could also mean that there are more immediate opportunities elsewhere. And so that's another thing to think about as well. But yeah, I would think that if Beyond Meat continues, this revenue growth trajectory, right? And if that's assisted with McDonald's going full on with this, I think they will eventually pop up on people's radars, including ARK Invest.
I would go bananas if that happens, and because and part of me, I keep wondering because it's the same thing with Shamat Palihapitiya, that everything I've heard him talking about in different interviews, he's normally one of my inspirations as an investor because he's been talking a lot about you should be investing in companies that actually makes a difference for people, makes a difference for the environment, and he's been all out about talking about that. And then he's in a couple of shows, he's been like kind of like making fun of vegans. He's talking about what's going on in the world, and then he's like, and why should you care about stupid vegan milk and stuff like that? And then he keeps talking about how much he loves meat, which is his opinion, and I respect that's okay, but it's more like he's almost like showing how he gets annoyed with like these tree huggers or like people who are trying to make make a difference in the world by choosing to eat more plant-based, right? So
Yeah.
it makes me kind of insane, and it gets me thinking: why is the same thing with Cathy Wood that she doesn't talk about this? She doesn't invest in this. Talk about the environment, but that according to the UN has been out there for 15 years now, and so many other organizations. There's nothing else that disrupts the sustainability of the planet more than meat and dairy. Yet they don't
Hmm.
even mention that. And the only thing I can think about, because I don't think it's a conspiracy, and not that part, but I think it's what the way you live your life culturally. If you're eating meat every day or and drinking dairy, you're not even thinking about these kind of things. What do you say?
I think it's because, look, this is the reason why this is happening, in my view, is that nobody wants to stop eating what they love. That's, I think, what it boils down to.
Yeah,
Um, it's one thing to replace your, you know, petrol powered car with an electric car. It's a different thing to give up eating meat
yeah,
for most people.
yeah.
It's like, for example, like, in the Seaspiracy, the Netflix documentary on the realities of seafood, right?
Great documentary.
Yeah, and the maker of the film, remember, he paid a visit to this one. I can't remember the name of that institution, which seeks to, protect the environment, right? And for some bizarre reason, they have a whole list of things that we could do to, protect the environment, protect the seas, the oceans. And yet, one notably absent recommendation is to eat less seafood. um, how is that omitted? It's just that the people that run these institutions, they themselves eat meat
Yeah,
and eat seafood
yeah.
and enjoy it too much and don't have anything to replace it with.
And kind of what we find out in Cowspiracy also, that that when it comes to Greenpeace, I've always thought that's so funny. I mean, I've met people always talk about fundamentals and too combative, or but I mean, the people or the as an organization, they'll be out there with their small little boats and go against oil tankers, basically sacrificing their lives. Yet, if Cowspiracy is correct to some extent, even Greenpeace, before anyways, it might change now, but this is like 6 7 years ago. At that time, didn't, and like a lot of environmental organizations don't mention the biggest culprits, right? And then we find out that they're also sponsored by the meat industry to some extent,
Mhm.
and didn't want to have any filming or talking about this situation at all. So it's really funny in that way. I think
Yeah.
it's or sad should probably be the word.
Yeah. And I think so. This will change, I think. See, I think the reason why this is happening is because people don't have an alternative that's just as good,
Yeah.
right? Until Beyond Meat. So
Mm.
this is why I think Beyond Meat is doing is equally as important as what Tesla is doing.
Yeah.
Because before Tesla, there wasn't even an option to get away from, um, to get away from fossil fuels.
Yeah.
Right? There's no other way to do it unless if you just take public transit everywhere or you ride your bicycle everywhere. And for many people, that's not even practical because they don't live near a station, a public transit station. It takes a very long time to commute sometimes if you live in the suburbs of a place and need to commute into the city. It adds a lot of time, a lot of, so it's very inconvenient, right? Public
Yeah.
transit in many cases. It's
Yeah.
easy if you live in the city, but not if you live outside of the city. So,
Yes.
I think because of a lack of good alternatives, that's why, no one is talking about this. But I think once, Beyond Meat proves to the world in a very highly visible way that there is this product and it does taste just as good as meat and it is just as nutritious as meat without the downsides of meat, and you don't have to pay a higher price for it. If you get these three things right, I think the sky is the limit,
Yeah.
for attacking market share.
Definitely. Definitely. Wow, this was a great conversation, and I'm really happy to have had you back on the channel again. And it feels like I think we'll be talking for 1 hour 40 minutes soon, and I
Yeah,
could see this going for another 1 to 2 hours easily. So,
yeah,
but that's why, guys, like I've talked about before, and I'm hoping Mayur is okay with that. That I would definitely want to see him come back here on a regular basis when things happen, especially with Beyond Meat and maybe other plant-based companies with time. Talking about this, so I think both of us want to build up this community, which is plant-based investing, and I think also just for sustainability. That's why Tesla is so big. Tesla is my understanding. You showed, guys, before I let you go, I've look in the description, guys, if you want to connect with Mayur, because I have added his Twitter account there. So take a look at that. And here, if we go in here, we have his Twitter account here. Let's just see Mayur. So you're growing a lot, because it wasn't long ago since you were barely at 13,000. Now you're at 14,500 here. So things are happening here. So if you want to connect with him here, he talks about investing all the time and sustainable companies. He also has here where you can see the 18 companies that he is investing in. And I think the one that's your biggest, right, is Tesla. And then Square and T-Doc, right?
Yeah, those are my three biggest positions. Beyond Meat is my fifth largest, position. So,
That's pretty large
yeah,
of the 18 companies anyhow.
yeah, yeah, it's pretty big.
Yeah.
And I actually made it bigger recently with the sell-off now. So I added more at, I believe, 70. So I'm still underwater on that second buy,
Right.
but I really need to reduce my cost basis because I definitely bought in pretty high here. So I'll probably do one more buy before all of this is over.
Yeah.
That'll get me probably Beyond Me to the number 4 position.
All right. So yeah, I have a pretty, for being me and my family, a pretty large, about, I would say about 10% in my portfolio Apple, and I keep thinking we've done really well with Apple the last 1.5 year, like 35% to 40%, something like that. And part of me has been thinking that I should take some of that to move into either Beyond or Oatly. I'm also getting interested more and more in T-Doc, considering the 52-week low now, which is insane. So just to diversify a little bit more. But yeah, I have this kind of like Chicken Genius and Steven attitude. Sometimes I want to go really focus on just one or two, three companies and go all in them. But right now, since I'm investing with my whole family's money, I got to be careful there, of course. So
Yeah.
but my largest is in Tesla, for sure, right now. So
Yeah.
all right. But so guys, stay tuned. We'll be back hopefully soon. And thank you, Mayur, for coming on the channel again a second time. Really happy to have you here.
Awesome. Thanks, Jesse. I love it.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.